Hey guys, so today I want to talk about these Alliance War Season 32 changes and how some of this will affect Alliance War in general. I want to start making these type of videos a more common occurrence. I feel I just have a lot of fun talking about some of this, really nitty-gritty strategy bits in Alliance War. It's what really keeps me interested in Alliance War. Is more the planning side of things. Definitely my favorite part of war. Aside from, the group collaboration, in the mode itself rather than the community, I really love the strategy side for Alliance War and talking about all of that. So yeah, the first thing I want to talk about for Season 32 is just going over what the tactics updates are. So for Defiance, for this new tactic, we won't have this in Expert yet. We're going to still have the power down tactic for this season, and then for the next 2 seasons we'll get this Defiance attack tactic. So what this does is the defenders gain immunity to buffs, and whenever they would trigger buff, they gain some energy resistance. Now this is really interesting for specific matchups where you will actually want that energy resistance, and it kind of makes me confused at why they would do this after high ground is already gone. Like, this seems perfect for high ground, but now high ground is gone, and I assume not coming back for a good amount of time. So let's talk about some of the matchups that I see this affecting. First of all, Abomination Immortal for 53 Chavez. He's been getting used for this matchup quite a bit. He's going to get a pretty significant benefit here. Being immune to buffs, Mystic Dispersion will no longer exist at all, and the energy resistance is really nice for Chavez's L2 since it is energy damage, so he's going to get a pretty significant safety boost for that matchup if that matchup continues to be a thing, which, I mean, it's really not a difficult placement, so I'm not sure if it will remain there for another 2 seasons. Another thing is Mr. Fantastic versus Power Snack Dooms. This will allow you to not have to worry about activating Dex and getting that shock on you for Power Snack Doom, which will just make him so extremely safe here. There will be really nothing to that fight at all. And that's going to be a pretty significant boost for Mr. Fantastic versus Power Snack Dooms. Power Snack in general, I don't think this will really benefit Mr. Fantastic since he does actually reverse the power, and a lot of the time it will just be better to get that reverse for the power gain than to just have him not gain the buff at all, which will be interesting. And yeah, those are the 2 big changes I see happening with this, at least on the current map. Whole new map changes could happen, new tactic changes could happen by the time this is out, so that's just my initial impression for this. And now to talk about Unstoppable Armor. Unstoppable Armor, is there a description for it here? I don't see the description for it here, but what it is whenever an armor up buff triggers, there's a 30% chance to gain a 3-second Unstoppable and to go immune to stuns during this Unstoppable. And yeah. And the other thing it does is give a 10-second timer for armor ups. The main thing I see happening with this is a lot of Skrull and Black Panther Civil Wars becoming significantly more difficult fights. As far as what attackers are going to benefit from it, there is Sorcerer Supreme. Of course, she's going to get a lot of benefit, both having slow and nullify to take advantage of those armors and feed your Mystic Dispersion, and have the slow to just not have to worry about the Unstoppable at all. Excuse me, she'll get some pretty big benefit for Unstoppable Armor in quite a few matchups. Specifically, Super Skrull bosses, which I expect to be somewhat common with Unstoppable Armor. I expect that will be one of the better bosses. I expect Sorcerer to be one of the best options for that. And yeah, she'll be getting a fairly big benefit. And next, there are a couple of more boring champions I want to discuss that will be getting benefited, and that's Quake. A lot of these defenders are Quake friendly. I believe there are only 2 champions in the entire pool who are not able to be Quaked, Mangog, and I'm forgetting what the other one was, but it wasn't really that relevant of a defender. And this means we're going to be seeing a lot more Quake, which sucks. Hopefully this also means Quake bans, though, because Quake bans would be nice to just not have to worry about Quake at all. But yeah, getting benefit to Quake, that's just annoying. You know, we do have more 6-star R4s now, but we don't really have enough to stop Quake yet. I'm sure with 7.4, when that drops, the leaked rewards have a 3 to 4 gem. We're probably going to start seeing more R4 defenders with that, so maybe by that time, Quake will be a little bit less relevant, but currently how it looks right now, Quake is going to get a pretty big benefit from this. And that sucks, honestly, because Quake is just so boring. And yeah, the next champion that's going to get big benefit from Unstoppable Armor is Corvus, because a lot of these defenders are Corvus charges, and Corvus tends to work quite well against, you know, fights that would slow you down. The Unstoppable is really mainly intended to slow you down in these fights, and Corvus will really not be slowed down to a point where it's going to be detrimental in most of these matchups. In certain matchups like Black Panther Civil War and Skrull, it's not going to be quite so easy to just use Corvus against them, but he's going to get a lot of benefit against a lot of these defenders, and that's not really that interesting in terms of war planning or war at all in general. And yeah, the fourth that I think is going to get a fairly big benefit is Claire. For these Skrull and Black Panther Civil Wars, Claire's buff immunity is going to be very easy to keep up. And buff immunity will stop the armor ups before they can really trigger, and this will stop Unstoppable Armor, of course. The Faith Seal type of deals are the real only way to completely shut it down, and then you have Medusa's Armor Shatter, which will also shut it down, kind of like a Faith Seal. It just stops the armor up from ever triggering. And of course, Vision Arcus's Armor Shatter in the same sense. And then you have Mephisto's Fate Seal and like Tiger's Neutralize will also stop this. And Ability Accuracy can also stop the armor ups from triggering, which will stop it. This means like Archangel, Magneto will stop a lot of this, which is really not the most exciting from how this looks at the moment. As far as the pool goes, the main 2 I really see becoming the main 3 fights I really see becoming problem fights are no 20-man thing. This has already been a problem fight, and now it's going to get a little bit harder, so I think it's fair to say that could be a problem fight. And then Super Skrull on a variety of nodes, including the main thing I would mention for Super Skrull is to not put him on a path. I know 35 and 44 Skrulls have been discussed a lot. I think these are horrible placements for Super Skrull because it's very easy to boss rush for a single path and then to just not have Unstoppable Armor at all. And then you completely lose Unstoppable Armor for Super Skrull at all. And that's really not going to be all that great. And Black Panther Civil War in general, I imagine will be quite difficult. One of the main placements that's been talked about for Black Panther Civil War is No 26, which I imagine will be quite difficult and will be one you have to boss rush for, which will be interesting, you know. More boss rushes for intersection minis tend to, you know, make planning significantly more difficult, and you tend to have a lot of more compromised matchups if you have to boss rush something. So this will be very interesting in how that affects things, but I also can't imagine, you know, a Sorcerer or a Claire, you know, although they do get a lot of negative from the Disorient unblock, I imagine they'd be perfectly fine here as well. You would just have to be very careful with them. And I imagine the best option is going to just be to boss rush and then use the Corvus or a Paco. And yeah. For 20-man things, the best option is going to be Omega or Quake. Again, I'm sure Thing with White Mags can technically do it, and Nebula will probably struggle with this matchup a lot more, and same with Overseer. They'll probably struggle a lot for this matchup now. And yeah, that's some of the main placements I see. And now to talk about bans a little bit. The main thing I can see changing with bans is potentially, while UA is new, certain allies will try to take advantage and go really hard on a bunch of UA defenders and ban Corvus and Quake, and just make it really just spam UA a lot with Corvus, Quake, and likely Ghost or Hercules or some other nuke in general champion as the third ban. And I think this is quite likely during the early stages of this new tactic. But I also think it's fairly likely bans stay the exact same as last season. One thing I would mention, Apoco bans are probably a little less likely with UA. The long specials don't really interact well with timers generally. And I also think Doom bans are going to be a little bit less likely, since Doom will work amazingly for Unstoppable Armor. I'm sure I'll get a few gameplay videos of how to do Doom versus Unstoppable Armor perfectly safely during the season. I've done some off-season testing, and during the season, I'm excited to show you guys and get into the specifics for certain fights with that. And yeah, that's what I expect really happening with bans. Not the most interesting changes for bans, likely. I do hope Quake gets banned just so I don't have to use her. And yeah. And now to talk about the node changes for the season, of course. This Power Snack change, I really don't understand this change much. A lot of the best Power Snack counters either completely ignore this change because they just bypass the node, or they're actually going to get benefit from this. To talk about some of these ones who get benefit, you have Reed and Mr. Apocalypse, who are going... Apocalypse with the new attack tactic for power down is going to be reversing the power, and now you're going to have more power to reverse, so I imagine Apocalypse is going to be a top option for more power snack fights. And Reed, he's reversing the power, so he's going to get more power to reverse. And yeah, it's either not going to affect fights or make fights easier with Mr. Fantastic. Excuse me. And yeah, the third champ I want to talk about for Power Snack that will be affected by this, it's Doom. And someone did the math for this with the benefits to Power Snack, and see if you dexed after your L1, after the L3 cycle and all that, where, you power drained and they're at like under 2 bars, would it push them to 3 bars? And it won't. It will leave them a little bit under, even if they have Mystic Dispersion 5. If they have Mystic Dispersion 5 and it's a Mystic Defender, it will push them to 97% power. So you're still going to be fairly safe to do this with Doom, but it will be important for Mystic matchups to keep that in mind. And I do overall think it's going to be easier to use Doom for this node, because it will just be more power to get you into the cycle quicker. And this node 48 change is really the most interesting one, in my opinion. This Mist node is going to benefit Doom a lot, because it makes it so, getting those heavy knockdowns and having controlled buffs is going to be quite important. Any mist counters are, of course, going to get benefit from this. I would try to avoid placing someone who is too easy to use, like Hercules, Torch, Magneto, or Doom for. I imagine those are going to be some of the top options for this node. And also, as boring as it is, Quake will probably be a top option for this node as well. And yeah, for node 55, Hard Knock Life, we've talked about this a little bit, and the main placement that we think could potentially be a problem is Penny Parker on node 55 with like Corvus, Ghost, and Hercules bands, which I think is quite unlikely to happen, because there are still going to be other nukes who could take this fight comfortably. I do think you're no longer going to be able to Magneto a Penny Parker on 55, And for most of the fights that you would use like Killmonger or Mole Man for, due to the being able to intercept off block, you don't really need to parry with them. So I don't think it's going to be an issue for them. And for Archangel, it's going to heavily encourage you to use Horseman Archangel and White Mags, so you have that extra ability accuracy, so you have less parries failed by Hard Knock Life. You will still take a lot of chip damage, but I honestly don't see this being too much of an issue for most of the current counters for node 55. And I can definitely see Paco getting used for this node. And node 20, this node hasn't changed. I don't know why they put this here. I'm guessing it only changed in the lower tiers, but that's not what the old thing was for this, and this is obviously the same one that is currently there. So yeah, next season I am really not too excited for personally. A lot of Quake and Sorcerer Supreme, who tend to just be champs I in particular find boring, and yeah, a lot of nukes will be incentivized by this tactic, I expect, as well. And the node changes, I'm excited for the node 48 change. I definitely think some interesting things can be done with that. The 55 change is really nothing. It's just gonna mean more chip damage. And I really don't like Disorient as a node and as a thing in general. I really dislike Disorients because they just are an annoyance more than something to really make fights interesting. And yeah, it will definitely be an interesting season with Unstoppable Armor. And I think boss rushes are going to be super important. I want to add this in at the end. Boss rushes for paths in general, if there's, a path with UA placed, which I think is going to be quite likely, since, a lot of these defenders really aren't going to be hard enough to justify mini spots. A lot of them are going to be placed on paths. I think it's fairly likely a lot of people are going to boss rush for these specific paths where UA is on, to just avoid having to worry about fitting in specific counters to counter UA. And I also think this is going to be quite likely for the Hazard Shift node on Boss Island. If the Hazard Shift scroll is placed, you're going to want to make sure your boss isn't going to be Kingpin, Angela, Ghost, or Rogue friendly. Of course, Ghost I expect to be banned, but you will need to keep that in mind for 49 if you plan on placing a scroll there. And I would try to not place some of the best Unstoppable Armor counters. Some of the best Unstoppable Armor defenders on places where it's very easy to take the boss down before that, because what this will do is allow it for most planners will just plan around that, and then you just won't have Unstoppable Armor for that defender and all. And if it's on a path, or it's on like 49 with a Kingpin boss, or something like that, it's really not going to be much of an inconvenience, whereas if it's on an intersection mini, or, on like node 54, or node 55, then it can be quite a pain to try and get boss down for that, and you're likely going to have to take at least some of them with Unstoppable Armor up. So yeah, I think that's really all I have to say about next season. Sorry if I sound a little disinterested in it. It's just not the most exciting of changes, to be honest.